Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Kim, what are the stakes of these Senate elections in November 2024? One other thing that I thought was notable from Steve Daines's remarks to the Ripon Society is that he says the filibuster is essentially on the ballot because Democrats, if they take control of the chamber, will eliminate that 60-vote threshold. And so any sort of legislation you can imagine would be able to pass with a bare minimum of 50 votes and then a vice presidential tiebreaker. And there are definitely some progressive candidates who are promising to do this. I would point to the campaign agenda of the leading candidate to be California's next senator, that is Representative Adam Schiff. And he is explicitly promising on his campaign website to abolish the filibuster so that Democrats with a bare majority can pass a national right to abortion, gun safety legislation, the PRO Act to change the rules on labor negotiations, higher corporate tax rate, and so on and so forth. But Kim, do you think that that position of Adam Schiff's to get rid of the filibuster would be the majority position of the Democratic caucus if that's what we end up leading the chamber, the Senate, in 2025?
Oh, I already know. I've done a survey of this, and the vast majority are all on the record of saying that they're in favor of killing the filibuster. The real rarities are the people like Joe Manchin, who, by the way, is also leaving the Senate, which is an issue. He is one of the firm no votes. Now, he will be replaced by a Republican in all probability in West Virginia. But it's one more Democratic voice against it. So the minority are the folks like Joe Manchin. And, just to talk a little bit more about that agenda and what would be possible if you got rid of the filibuster. I mean, there are both major structural questions. That includes adding 4 seats to the Senate, which is Adam Schiff's proposal, although there are many other ones by different Democrats. Some want to term limit the justices so that you can force some of the older members like Clarence Thomas off the court. Others have plans that you would have rotating justices on the Supreme Court. So that's a big structural change. There's this talk about federalizing elections, essentially allowing Washington to dictate all the rules that govern how elections are managed, even at the state level. And of course, that particular piece of legislation that Adam Schiff is talking about has all the provisions that Democrats like because they think it helps them win elections, same-day voter registration, watered-down voter ID. And then you get to the policy side, and you mentioned some of them, but, certainly expect challenges to your Second Amendment rights because Democrats will pass very sweeping gun legislation, taxes you mentioned, but also remember all of those freebies that Democrats attempted to tee up back in the wake of Joe Biden's election and using the so-called crisis of COVID. They wanted to institute what was essentially cradle to grave entitlements. And Adam Schiff was teeing up those again, a child allowance, universal basic income, the cancellation of student loans. I'm sure that we're going to get to, certainly we would be having votes on things like universal childcare, universal preschool, and free college. So this is a really, really high stakes debate. And it's something that, unfortunately, I think has not been anywhere near a big enough part of the discussion, both in the presidential election and in some of these Senate races, that it isn't just the White House that is at stake here. Senate and congressional control could be equally consequential because of the threat to the filibuster.
The other possibility is a Republican in the White House, not out of the realm of imagination, especially with all the polls still showing that President Trump leads Joe Biden in November. And if that's the case, then whoever controls the Senate could end up deciding whether any kind of Republican agenda or Trump agenda is able to get through Congress, or whether we just have 4 years of grinding stalemate again. Because if Democrats win the Senate in November of 2024, there are not very good prospects for Republicans regaining it in 2026. For one thing, the party that is in power in the White House generally has some headwinds. And then the map in 2026 is just much less favorable. There are 20 Republican incumbents who are up for election in 2026 versus 13 Democrats. And there are a couple of states where you can maybe imagine Republican pickups, one being Georgia, maybe Michigan. On the other hand, there are also a couple states you can imagine going the other direction, Republican incumbents in Maine and Iowa who will be facing elections. So at the very least, it is more of a jump ball than this 2024 map ought to be for Republicans. And so, Monet, that's the other possibility, is you end up with a Republican president in the White House, and boy, that Senate control will still matter then as well.
Absolutely. I think that for Republicans, these races in 2024 should be seen as do or die because of how favorable the map currently is. As Kim mentioned, there's that very likely pickup in West Virginia, and we covered the very competitive races in Ohio, Montana, and Arizona that Republicans should be well positioned to win. It's very hard to look 2 years ahead and see anything comparable. As you mentioned, there's the possibility of John Ossoff in Georgia getting a really tough race again if Georgia primary voters are able to nominate someone competitive there to run against him. Same thing in Michigan. Gary Peters will be seeking re-election. He's fairly popular despite voting with Joe Biden almost all the time, has managed to cultivate a brand that still appeals to middle-of-the-road voters in Michigan. And so that could be a competitive race, but not one that should be seen as a gimme. New Hampshire theoretically could be competitive with Jeanne Shaheen seeking re-election there. But I think that it is really very unlikely that you're going to have major pickups in 2026. That means that if President Trump is wanting to get any major legislation passed, it's going to have to be with pickups that are done in this election cycle. And so while there still is the opportunity to nominate quality candidates, that's exactly what party leaders are going to have to focus on and not throw away some of these winnable races.
Thank you, Monet and Kim. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back next week with another edition of Potomac Watch.